Hi, this is Chris Long from Lakeview Cottage Kids, and today we're going to talk about how to make a bookmark, a crochet flower bookmark. And you can see that I have a couple examples right here. One that is done in the pink with the two flowers with the buttons on either side, and the whole length of this stretched out is approximately 12 inches. Now of course you can change the chaining between the flowers to whatever you would like, but I did it for an average to larger size book length, and so this one is approximately 12 inches. That's the pink one. Here's the one that's done in an aqua color. The yarn that I'm using for this is the Hobby Lobby. I love this cotton yarn, but of course you could do it in any kind of yarn that you want to get different ideas. I also have 4 buttons here. They're about 3/4 inch buttons. That fits this particular size flower quite well, but I've chosen some. We need 4 of them for each bookmark because of the fact that we put a button on both sides of each flower. Now to start with, what we do is just using our magic circle, we're going to make the first flower. And again, if you need some brushing up on the magic circle, please be sure to check my blog and my video for how to do that. So here we've got our magic circle, and in this case we are going to use our G hook. And as I said, our Hobby Lobby, I love this cotton number 4 weight, medium weight yarn, and we're going to do 5 double crochets in our magic circle. And you could start doing variations on this with single crochets or half double crochets, but I've found that for this particular flower, for this size button, the double crochets using the G hook works really well. So there are our 5 double crochets, and now what we want to do is pull up our circle. And because there aren't a lot of double crochets in this, you're going to have to kind of slide it around and then do a slip stitch into the top of the first double crochet. And there we have the center of our first flower. Now what we want to do is begin the first petal, so we'll do 2 chains, and then we're going to do in the same double crochet of the center, we're going to do 3 double crochets. This is making our petal, and then we're going to do 2 chains. Do a slip stitch into the same stitch that we've been putting those in, and there is petal number 1. Slip stitch into the next stitch of the center, next double crochet, do 2 chains, 3 double crochets, and again we have a video on how to do double crochet, a little bit slower approach on my blog if you want to just focus on that stitch. Do 2 chains, slip stitch into the same stitch, and there is our second petal. Slip stitch into the next double crochet, 2 chains, 3 double crochets, if you've been looking at a number of my patterns, you'll know that I use this particular flower or a variation thereof that's very close on a lot of my hats. It's extremely versatile, and you can use it on so many different projects. Now we're on our 4th petal. Do our 3rd double crochet here, 2 chains, slip stitch into the same double crochet. There we have our 4 petals, and one more, slip stitch, 2 chains, 3 double crochets, 2 chains, and slip stitch into the same double crochet that we were doing the other stitches. There are our 5 petals for flower number 1, and now what I'm going to do is to kind of connect all this together. I'm actually going to go right into the space where we started our very first petal. I'm going to go into that, do a slip stitch. That kind of brings everything together. Now, under normal conditions, we would want to fasten off our flower and be done ready to sew it on or weave in the ends. But for our bookmark, we're going to actually chain so that we get a chain that connects our second flower to our first flower. So what we are going to do for the 12-inch bookmark is to chain 40. So there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, halfway there, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and 40. So now we've got our chain that's going to be our connection between the 2 flowers. And now what we want to do is make our second flower, and we could make a chain and sew the flower on, but the way I've done it is it works pretty well, especially when you're doing one color. So what I'm going to do, instead of doing the flower center by doing the magic circle, I'm going to go back to the way of doing a circle or a center of a flower by going to the second chain from the hook, and I'm going to do my 5 double crochets in that second chain from the hook, and this is going to give me the center for my flower number 2. So here we've got 4 and 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then what I'm going to do is slip stitch to the top of that first double crochet. Okay, now if it looks a little lopsided or a little not quite so tight as we do with a magic circle, don't worry about that, because we are getting the center and it will be covered by the buttons too. So this works really well, and you don't have to be sewing things on. It all is just part of the same chain. Now, to do the row of petals, we just do what we've done before. We are going to chain 2, and in that next double crochet we are going to do our 3 double crochets to fill out our petal, and then chain 2, slip stitch into the same double crochet we've been working in. Next, slip stitch into the next double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochets for our second petal, chain 2 into the same double crochet space we've been using. There's 2 petals. Slip stitch into the next double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochets, chain 2 into the same space, 2 chains, 3 double crochets, and then 2 chains and a slip stitch into the double crochet. Now we've got 4 of our petals, and the last one we want to put in slip stitch, chain 2, three double crochets. And by the way, that sound you heard was my dryer finishing up its cycle. Slip stitch, and there we have our 5 petals. And we're going to, again, in this case, where I kind of just choose a spot where I'm going to hook this all together, and I'm going to go right down here below the stitches and into kind of the center and do a slip stitch, and then 1 more chain. Okay, so there we have our second flower. Okay, now in this case, again, I did my slip stitch, and I'll go back and show I'm going to do 1 more chain, and then I'm going to leave about 7 or 8 inches of yarn and cut that off, pull this through to lock in my flower. Now you'll notice I've got my 2 flowers connected by my chain. Now what's left is that we'll be sewing on the buttons and finishing off by weaving in the ends of the yarn, but that's all there is to it. Now the next thing that we need to do is I went back to the first flower, flower number 1, and remember we do have our yarn right here from when we began our magic circle, and that's probably about 5 or 6 or 7 inches. And what I've done is taken my tapestry or crewel needle. Basically what you want is the needle that's going to be thin enough to get through your smaller buttonholes, but that has got the longer opening to put your yarn through. So that's always a little tricky compromise there to try and figure out which needle is going to be best. But check your needles, see which one that will go through your buttonholes and will accommodate your yarn. So what we want to do is I'm actually going to come through on from the back to the front, little off center on the center of my flower. I'm going to pull that through. Then I'm going to take one of my buttons and bring that, get that centered in the middle of my center of my flower. There you can see it. Then I'm going to go down through the other hole of the button, pull that through. You don't have to go super tight. You don't want it hanging, but it doesn't have to be super tight. Now what you want to do is take and turn your flower over and take your second button, and it doesn't even have to be exactly the same size, and it certainly in my case is not the same type of button. This is actually maybe a touch bigger. It's supposed to be a 3/4, but might be a touch bigger. And this one actually is a little flatter, and it has little polka dots on it. So you can kind of go through your button stash and see what you've got. This is a wonderful pattern to use up a lot of small bits of yarn and your buttons and still make something that's really cute. Or you can go to the store and look and coordinate everything. So here what we're going to do is go through that buttonhole, but then make sure that we are turned so that we can get through in the same stitch, go through this button on the back into the button on the front. Okay, so now there we went once already through both holes on the front, came through to the back, went through. There we've got the back button. I'm on the front. Basically I'm going to go through twice on each one. So I'm going to go down, and if they're lined up, when I go through down on one button, it comes out the hole on the back. And again, you don't want to have to go through too many times because it starts getting tight. So I've gone through twice on the button on the front. Now I'm ready to just go through one more time on the back. And what I'm going to do is go through all the way, but I'm actually going to turn, kind of angle my needle so I'm not going into the button on the top. I already went through that twice, but I'm going to pull this through, and this is the little tougher part, so you have to kind of pull a little bit. Now both of my buttons have been secured with 2 stitches, but I now have this on the top of my flower. I'm going to go under the first button and kind of catch a couple little stitches of yarn, pull through, go through the loop before I pull it tightly, and kind of just make a little knot. Okay, and I'm going to do that again, and all of this is happening underneath my button. And again, you have a loop, pull that through, kind of knots everything down, and then so that it doesn't really show, I'm just going to go right across between the 2 buttons, pull it in from one side to the other, go in again, pull through from one side to the other to kind of lock everything down. Now we still have to do this for the second flower, and this time we have the end of the yarn that we finished the whole flower off with. It's not the magic circle beginning like we had on the first flower. So what we want to do is just take this and turn the flower over and kind of wind this, or kind of go underneath a couple of the stitches so we're kind of in the center of our flower. Okay, and there we have our flower. Now we're going to go back, we're going to come up little off center and push our needle up through the yarn. And now we're going to get one of our buttons just like we did with flower 1. And again, you can see I'm using different colored buttons and a little bit different style button, but basically the same size, 3/4 inch. Get it centered on our center of the crocheted flower. Push the needle down through the buttonhole, turn the whole thing over, take our second button, and in this case what you want to do again is come up from the bottom of it, get that centered on the back, and notice that that just kind of catches everything from our chain. And now we put our needle through, and you want to make sure it's lined up to come through on the other side. So we push that down. Again, it doesn't have to be super tight. Now we're going to go through with our second stitch to hold this down. Goes through the first button. Make sure it's coming out the hole of the second button. Pull that through. And now to do our second stitch on the back side, we go through this, but it comes through the button, through the actual flower, but on the other side we're going to try and make it slant so it does not come out the button but just on the side button of the button. Pull that through, and now we want to just make a couple little knots underneath, grab a couple stitches of the flower, and it can get a little tight here, so just kind of bear with it. Have your loop, put your yarn through, put your needle underneath between both buttons, pull it through, and then if you want to you can do one more. Just pull through, get your loop. It always likes to go around one of the petals, so make sure you pull that free. Bring your needle into the loop, pull it tight, and now go underneath the button, cross it, and now you can cut that yarn off. And you've got a button on both sides of flower number 2. You've got number 1, and again you can choose how you want to coordinate buttons and yarn and the whole thing, but here you have your approximately 12-inch long bookmark. that you can give out to family and friends, or this week particularly when it's Teacher Appreciation Week. So again, the pattern for all of this is at my blog, and also if you have any creations that you'd like to show, be sure you check my Facebook page and put a picture up there. If you have any questions, please be sure to contact me at clong1954@gmail.com. Thanks again. This is Chris Long from Lakeview Cottage Kids.